The text came in the middle of my workday, right as I was helping a customer decide between two scarves. I'm leaving you and moving to Miami with my 20-year-old girlfriend. I've emptied our joint account. Haha, I didn't drop the scarf. I didn't gasp. I didn't even blink. I smiled at Mrs. Peterson, wrapped her purchase in our signature silver paper, and wished her a wonderful afternoon. Then, I locked the boutique, pulled down the blinds, and sat at the counter, rereading the text. Mark, my husband of 12 years, thought he had just won. He thought I'd fall apart, sobbing in the middle of my store, broken and devastated by his betrayal. He thought I was blind to the signs. But here's the thing about being underestimated. You get to watch people dig their own graves without them realizing it. Mark had been slipping for months. Late nights at work that didn't match his paychecks. A sudden obsession with the gym and his wardrobe. New cologne, a tighter shirt, a nervous flicker in his eyes whenever I picked up his phone. The first real proof came 3 months ago. A receipt from an upscale restaurant. Dinner for 2, on a night when he claimed he was working late. That same night, I made my own move. I opened a new bank account. I started quietly transferring money from our joint savings into my personal one. I hired a private investigator, and while I played the dutiful, oblivious wife, Mark dug his own hole deeper. 2 months ago, he mentioned wanting to combine our finances for simplicity. I cheerfully agreed, while ensuring that my boutique's profits, my personal investments, and my emergency funds were nowhere near his reach. Mark thought he was so smart. But today, as he proudly announced his grand escape, what he didn't know was this: he hadn't robbed me. I had set a trap. Another text buzzed through. Don't bother begging. Melissa and I leave tomorrow. I'll send for my things later. Melissa, the new 20-year-old receptionist at his office. The one who laughed a little too hard at his jokes at the Christmas party. The one who touched his arm when she thought I wasn't looking. The one who was about to realize that she had hitched herself to a sinking ship. My phone buzzed again. I know this must be hard for you. You're not getting any younger after all. At least you have your little shop to keep you busy. My little shop? My boutique, which I had built from the ground up, which had expanded into a thriving business, which made more money than his middle management salary ever had. I actually laughed out loud. That was the moment I knew. Mark wasn't just cruel, he was stupid. I finished locking up the store, grabbed my handbag, and walked down the street, enjoying the crisp air. There was a bottle of Chateau Margaux at home, the good stuff, that I had been saving for a special occasion. This counted. But first, I made a quick call. Claire, it's time. My lawyer. He finally did it? Claire, yeah, he made his move. Now we make ours. She chuckled. The papers are ready. Do you want me to have him served in Miami? I smirked. No rush. Let him enjoy his little fantasy first. Next, I called the bank. I spoke with the fraud department, my tone calm and professional. I need to report fraudulent charges on my shared credit card. My husband used it to book flights and hotels for his affair. They pulled up the transactions. First-class flights to Miami, a luxury hotel reservation at the Royal Palm, all paid for with our joint account. The representative barely concealed her satisfaction as she processed the cancellations. Mark and Melissa would arrive at the airport tomorrow only to find their tickets voided. Their luxury hotel gone, their grand escape reduced to a budget inn near the airport. That was my parting gift. That night, I went home, to my house. Mark always called it our home, but his name was never on the deed. I had inherited it from my grandmother, and despite Mark's repeated suggestions, I had never added him to the ownership. Another instinct that had paid off. At 11:30 p.m., my phone buzzed. Don't worry about the house. I'll let you stay there until you find something smaller. He was letting me stay? In my own house? I almost wished I could be there to see his face when he learned the truth. He had no claim, no rights, no leverage. At midnight, he texted again. I know the boutique means a lot to you. We can work out a fair payment for your half. My half of my business? The business that I built, that I funded, that I expanded while he whined about my long hours? Oh, Mark, you really should have read the fine print. I took another sip of wine, feeling lighter than I had in months. Tomorrow, Mark would wake up thinking he had won, and then reality would hit. Hard. By sunrise, my phone was blowing up with messages from Mark. WTF? Did you do to our credit card? The airline won't honor our tickets. The hotel canceled our reservation. Answer me. I didn't bother responding. Instead, I spent the morning at the boutique, going through my latest shipment of designer handbags. Life moves on, even when your soon-to-be ex-husband realizes he's been played. Around noon, my mother-in-law called. "Claire, dear, Mark told us everything." I rolled my eyes. "He said you were controlling, that you pushed him away, that you're being vindictive now." I placed her on speakerphone while adjusting the window display. "Barbara, did he mention that he emptied our joint account?" Silence. "Or that he used our credit cards for his little vacation?" More silence. "Would you like me to forward his texts? You know, the ones where he bragged about it?" Her sigh was long and heavy. "He did seem cruel about it." I smiled. "Yes. Yes, he did." By late afternoon, I got another call. This time from my lawyer. "We have an emergency hearing scheduled for Monday." Mark still thought he had leverage. He still thought he could claim my business, my home, and my money. But by next week, he'd be learning the truth. Because Mark wasn't just losing a wife. He was losing everything. Monday morning arrived, crisp and clear. I sat in my car outside the courthouse, sipping my coffee, watching the doors where my soon-to-be ex-husband was about to walk through. Today was the day Mark realized he was in trouble. I had dressed the part, a navy blue tailored suit, sleek heels, and my favorite diamond earrings. If I was going to dismantle his delusions, I'd do it looking impeccable. At exactly 9:47 a.m., Mark arrived. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. Gone was the cocky, gloating man who had sent me that ridiculous ha-ha text last week. His eyes were tired, his shirt slightly wrinkled, and his expression downright furious. Melissa, his 20-year-old mistress, was nowhere in sight. A shame. I would have loved for her to see this. Inside, my lawyer, Olivia, was already waiting, calm and collected, her leather portfolio resting neatly on the table. Mark's lawyer, a man I recognized as cheap and desperate, looked slightly stressed, shuffling through papers as if trying to find something to save his client. I settled into my chair and folded my hands in my lap. Let the show begin. The judge wasted no time. "Mr. Harrison, let's discuss the financial misconduct first. Your wife has provided evidence that you emptied your joint account, an amount totaling $47,300, after she had already moved her personal assets to a separate account. Would you like to explain this?" Mark cleared his throat. Well, I was making a clean break. The money was part mine too." My lawyer adjusted her glasses. "And yet, Your Honor, here are text messages in which Mr. Harrison gloats about taking the money, explicitly stating he was running off to Miami with his girlfriend. And, if I may," she pulled out a folder and slid it toward the judge. "Here are the statements showing where that money was spent. Flights, hotel rooms, and luxury dinners, none of which benefited my client." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Harrison, did you use these funds for personal vacations?" Mark shifted in his seat. "I mean, technically, yes, but..." The judge held up a hand. "Say no more. Given the premeditated nature of this withdrawal and misuse of shared marital funds, I am ordering you to return the full amount to Mrs. Harrison within 24 hours. Mark's mouth fell open. "What? That money's gone. I can't just..." The judge didn't blink. "Then I suggest you figure it out." A vein twitched in Mark's temple. He turned toward me, glaring like I was the problem. I simply smiled. Then came the real battle. Mark had made the mistake of assuming he had a right to my business. His lawyer leaned forward, suddenly hopeful. "Your Honor, the boutique grew substantially during the marriage. Mr. Harrison was emotionally supportive, helped with some business decisions, and believes he is entitled to a percentage of ownership." I almost rolled my eyes. My lawyer, unfazed, slid another document across the table. The business was established 3 years before the marriage. It was always maintained as a sole proprietorship under my client's name. Mr. Harrison did not invest, contribute, or handle any finances related to its growth. What he did do, however, is refer to it repeatedly as a little hobby in these text messages. She held up printed screenshots. "And here, Your Honor, is a message from Mr. Harrison just last week, suggesting that he could work out a fair price for Mrs. Harrison to buy out his half." The judge barely glanced at it. "Mr. Harrison, do you have any legally documented financial contributions to this business?" Mark's lawyer stammered. Mark himself had the audacity to look offended. I was married to her, wasn't I?" The judge sighed. "You were. But your name is not on this business. You made no financial contributions, and there is no legal documentation tying you to it. The boutique remains 100% Mrs. Harrison's." I exhaled slowly, hiding my smirk behind a neutral expression. Mark, on the other hand, looked ready to combust. Then came the final blow. Mark's lawyer gave it one last try. Your Honor, my client also believes he is entitled to a portion of the house. My lawyer didn't even look up from her notes. That would be impossible. The house was inherited by my client from her grandmother prior to the marriage. There are no shared ownership documents. But I lived there, Mark blurted. The judge, now visibly tired of him, sighed again. Mr. Harrison, living in a house does not make you its legal owner. You are not entitled to any share of the property. Mark turned, fully red-faced, and whispered sharply to his lawyer. I could only imagine what he was saying. Fix this. Get me something. I can't leave with nothing. But the reality had already sunk in. He had nothing. The judge finalized the ruling. Mark had to return the $47,300 he stole from our joint account. He had no claim to my boutique. He had no claim to my house. He had to cover my legal fees for wasting the court's time. Outside the courthouse, he stormed up to me. You set me up, he hissed. I raised an eyebrow. I protected myself. There's a difference. His fists clenched. You think you're so smart, but you'll regret this. You're cruel, Claire. I tilted my head. Cruel? You left me over text. You stole our savings. You flaunted your affair. And I'm the cruel one? He didn't have a response. Melissa, his young mistress, was nowhere to be seen. Word around town was that she had dumped him the second the credit card stopped working. A pity. Finally, he took a deep breath. Fine. You win. He turned to leave, shoulders hunched, defeated. I called after him one last time. No, Mark. I didn't win. You just lost. And you did it to yourself. As I walked away, my heels clicking against the pavement, I felt lighter than I had in years. Mark was officially out of my life. And now, it was time to really start living. I should have felt relief when I walked out of that courtroom. The judge had made it crystal clear Mark had lost my house, my business, my money, all mine. He was ordered to pay back the joint account funds, cover my legal fees, and walk away with nothing but the consequences of his own actions. But Mark, he wasn't done. The text started first. You think you're so clever, Claire, but this isn't over. Then came the calls. At first I ignored them. Then, after the 10th voicemail, I finally played one. Claire, be reasonable. We don't have to go to war over this. You've already humiliated me enough. Let's just split things fairly. I almost laughed. Fairly? Was it fair when he drained our joint account? Was it fair when he used our money to run off with his 20-year-old girlfriend? Was it fair when he thought he could leave me with nothing? I blocked his number. That should have been the end of it. But Mark was desperate, and desperate men make stupid mistakes. It started subtly. Customers at my boutique suddenly started asking questions. I heard your ex-husband was the real brains behind this place. Is it true you took everything in the divorce? I saw some posts online. Is it true you cheated first? I knew immediately where it was coming from. Mark had gone full scorched earth. He was spinning the story, painting himself as the poor, hardworking husband who had been ruthlessly stripped of everything by his cold, heartless ex-wife. I checked social media. Fake accounts were popping up, commenting on my boutique's posts, spreading lies. This store was built with stolen money. Claire's a fraud. She stole from her husband and left him homeless. Boycott this place. She ruined a man's life. Pathetic. I called Olivia, my lawyer. Looks like Mark doesn't know when to quit. She sighed. Let me guess. Slander, harassment, social media smears? Bingo. Good. That's exactly what I needed him to do. Olivia had anticipated this. She had documented everything. His texts, his threats, his blatant lies. The next morning, we filed a defamation lawsuit. The moment Mark was served, I got a text. Are you serious, Claire? This is ridiculous. I didn't respond. Instead, I let him stew in it. Within 24 hours, the fake accounts vanished. The comments stopped. His poor me posts disappeared. But I wasn't done. Remember how the judge ordered Mark to return the $47,300 he stole? Yeah, he hadn't paid it. And guess what? Ignoring a court order has consequences. My lawyer wasted no time. We froze his assets. We seized his accounts. We garnished his wages. Mark had expected me to let it go. Instead, I made sure that every single paycheck he earned would bleed until I got my money back. I was patient. I was relentless. I was exactly the kind of woman he had underestimated. One evening, I was locking up my boutique when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Claire. I turned. Mark. He looked rough, unkempt, dark circles under his eyes, his once too tight designer shirts now loose on his frame. "You win," he muttered. "Is that what you want to hear?" I crossed my arms. "I don't need to hear it, Mark. I already won." "You've ruined me," he spat. "I lost my job. Melissa dumped me. I'm drowning in debt." I held up a hand. "No, you did this to yourself. You could have walked away. You could have started over. Instead, you tried to destroy me. And now, you're standing in the ashes of your own life." His jaw clenched. He had nothing left to say. "Goodbye, Mark," I said, stepping back into my boutique. The business he had laughed at. The business he thought he could take, and I locked the door behind me. Mark was done. The defamation lawsuit was settled in my favor. He had to issue a formal public apology and pay damages. The court garnished his wages until I got every penny he owed me. His credit was in ruins. His reputation was destroyed. Meanwhile, I expanded my boutique into 2 new locations. The best part? People rallied behind me. Customers came in specifically to support my store. Women told me their own stories. Husbands who thought they could ruin them. Exes who underestimated their strength. And I realized something. I wasn't just winning. I was thriving. And Mark? Mark was nothing more than a name from my past. A lesson learned. A cautionary tale. And I had a whole future ahead of me. If Mark had any sense left, he would have stayed away. But Mark was never one to accept defeat gracefully. He wanted revenge. The problem was, I had already outmaneuvered him. A month after the defamation lawsuit was settled, Mark tried to appeal the divorce ruling. His claim that I had manipulated the legal system and that our assets had been unfairly divided. His argument? That my business had only grown because of his support. I laughed when I read the legal notice. Mark had never lifted a finger to help my boutique. If anything, he resented it. He was the one who called it my hobby. He was the one who mocked my late nights and early mornings. He was the one who spent my money while I built something real. Now, he wanted a piece of it? No. My lawyer filed a motion to dismiss immediately, attaching all the evidence we had, the financial records, the original settlement, and the judge's ruling. When the hearing date came, Mark didn't even show up. The judge threw his appeal out in less than 5 minutes. One more door slammed shut in his face. While my business flourished, Mark's life fell apart. Melissa left him. Apparently, dating a broke, unemployed, bitter man wasn't as fun as she'd imagined. He tried getting his job back, but his company had moved on after his HR violations. His debt piled up. Between the legal fees, the fines, and the court-ordered payments, he was drowning. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he was staying with a cousin because his parents had finally kicked him out. Even his own family was done with him. A few weeks later, I was hosting an industry networking event for local business owners. I was in the middle of discussing expansion plans when I saw him, Mark, in a cheap suit, standing by the entrance, looking around as if he didn't belong. Because he didn't. He looked older, smaller, like a man who had lost everything. Then I realized he wasn't there to harass me. He was there looking for a job. I watched from across the room as he approached different business owners, shaking hands, trying to sell himself as a valuable hire. Every time they politely dismissed him, he used to be so smug, so untouchable. Now he was just another washed-up man grasping at straws. It was poetic. A week later, my lawyer called me. Mark just tried to file for bankruptcy. I grinned. Let me guess. The court denied it? She laughed. Of course they did. See, when you owe someone money due to court-ordered judgments, you can't just erase it with bankruptcy. That's $47,300. He still had to pay every penny. I was his financial ghost, haunting every paycheck he would earn for years. He had no way out, not anymore. While Mark's life continued its spectacular collapse, mine was reaching new heights. My boutique had expanded to a 3rd location. I had hired a full-time operator to give myself more. I had started ring young female entrepreneurs, helping them avoid men like Mark. And one day, I received a business magazine wanted to, not because of my divorce, not because of Mark, but because of my success. The last time I ever saw Mark after our divorce was final, I was at a cafe, finalizing a contract for my next. I saw him gone who thought he had lost. I just smiled my coffee and walked. Mark had always underestimated that with part 5. Mark is suing you. I actually laughed. For what? For emotional distress. I nearly dropped my phone. You're joking. Oh, I wish I was. Apparently, Mark was claiming that my vindictive actions had ruined his life. The lawsuit included things like, she turned my family against me. She manipulated the courts to take all our assets. She intentionally humiliated me in public. She destroyed my reputation. I stared at the legal papers in disbelief. This man had stolen from me, cheated on me, mocked my age, left me via text message, and now he had the audacity to claim he was the victim? It was so absurd that I didn't even feel anger. I felt pity. But Mark wanted to play one last game. Fine, let's play. We walked into court a few weeks later. Mark was representing himself because, of course, no lawyer wanted to take his case. I had my legal team, and I had everything I needed. The judge barely let Mark speak before tearing his case apart. Mr. Harrison, this lawsuit is a complete waste of court resources. Mark tried to interrupt, but silence. The judge was furious. You publicly admitted to draining your joint account, committing credit card fraud, and attempting to claim assets that did not belong to you. You have a documented history of harassment and deception. This case is dismissed with prejudice. That meant he could never file it again. Then the judge delivered the final blow. Furthermore, for wasting the court's time, you are ordered to pay the defendant's legal fees. Mark turned pale. I can't afford that. The judge didn't even blink. That is not my problem, Mr. Harrison. I watched as the reality sank in for him. He had thought this was his big comeback. Instead, he had just dug himself even deeper. After the lawsuit disaster, Mark was truly finished. He couldn't file any more legal claims. His debts had only increased. His own family refused to support him. The last I heard, he was working at a car dealership, barely making ends meet. Meanwhile, my life was flourishing. My fourth boutique had just opened. My business was featured in a national magazine. I had been invited to speak at a major women's entrepreneur summit. And then I got an email from Mark. The subject line? I'm sorry. The message? Claire, I don't expect you to respond. I just wanted to say, I understand now. I was selfish. I was arrogant. And I destroyed everything. I lost my family, my career, my future. You were right about everything. I hope, wherever you are, you're happy. I read it twice, then I closed it, and I never responded, because I didn't need to. I had already won. One evening, I was sitting on my balcony, sipping wine, watching the sunset over my city. I thought about the woman I had been when Mark first left. The fear, the betrayal, the uncertainty, and I thought about the woman I was now. Stronger, smarter, unstoppable. Mark had thought he could break me. Instead, I had rebuilt myself, and as I watched the sun disappear behind the skyline, I smiled to myself, because for the first time in years, my life was truly mine, and that was the sweetest revenge of all. They say, time heals all wounds, but time didn't heal me. I healed myself, and now I was thriving. But just when I thought the past was fully behind me, life threw one last twist my way. 2 years had passed since Mark's final, pathetic attempt to drag me down with that ridiculous lawsuit. I hadn't heard from him since his apology email, and I hadn't given him a second thought. My life had only grown bigger. My fifth boutique had just opened, with plans for international expansion. I had been invited to speak at a high-profile women's business summit. My story was being featured in a best-selling business book about financial independence. I had built an empire from what Mark had once mocked as my little shop. And then, one day, out of nowhere, I saw him. I was at a networking event, chatting with a luxury brand executive about a potential collaboration. Then I turned, and there he was. Mark, serving drinks, his cheap name tag read, Mark, catering staff. For a moment, I just stared, not in shock, not in anger, but in fascination. This was a man who once mocked me, a man who thought he was too good for me, a man who walked out of my life like he was trading up. And now, he was pouring drinks at an event where I was the VIP guest. Oh, the irony. Mark saw me and froze. His face turned ghostly pale, like he had just seen a nightmare come to life, because to him, that's exactly what it was. I watched as panic flickered in his eyes. He turned away, pretending to wipe down the bar, acting like he hadn't seen, like he could just disappear. But I wasn't about to let him off that bar, sharp against the confidence in my step was something never seen. He had always a devoted wife. I was swapped up a cocked, smooth, pretending to, I smiled. Small world. His throat bobbed. Yeah, I leaned against the bar, tilting my head. So, tell me, what happened to Miami? He flinched. Hard. He knew exactly what I was doing. The same way he had once mocked me, belittled me, and dismissed me. I was now returning the favor. But the difference? I wasn't bitter. I was winning, and he was nothing. He sighed, rubbing his face. Look, Claire, I screwed up, okay? I just smiled. Oh, I know. He let out a weak chuckle. You were always smarter than me? I was. I nodded. He exhaled, looking away. You hate me, don't you? I didn't even have to think. No, he frowned. I don't hate you, Mark. I just don't care anymore. That hit him harder than any insult ever could, because hate means you still feel something. But indifference? That's when you know you're truly free. I picked up my drink and took a slow sip. Then I smiled at him one last time. Good luck, Mark. And then I turned and walked away, because I had better things to do, a bigger life to live, and he was nothing but a forgotten chapter. That moment wasn't just the end of Mark's story. It was the beginning of mine. I had rebuilt my life. I had grown beyond my past. I had proven to myself that I was unstoppable, and that was the greatest victory of all. Because the best revenge, it's not getting it's getting better. And I had never been better. Mark had faded into nothingness. I no longer heard whispers about his latest failures. His name never came up in conversations. He was just a forgotten ghost. And my life? It had never been bigger. I had officially expanded my boutique chain to international markets. My name was being recognized in the fashion industry as a pioneer. I had investments in luxury brands, partnerships with elite designers, and a growing network of high-profile clientele. I had become the woman I was always meant to be. And best of all, I had done it all on my own. One morning, I received a letter. It was from Mark's mother. I hadn't spoken to her since the divorce. Curious, I opened, and as I read the words inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Closure. Claire, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I had to write it. I owe you an apology. When Mark first left, I even blamed you. But I see now how wrong I was. My son lost everything because of his own selfishness. And I see now that you were the one holding everything together. I want you to know something. I'm proud of you. I see you on the news. I hear people talking about your success. And every time I do, I think to myself, she was always the smart one. She was always the strong one. And my son was the fool who let her go. I hope you're happy, Claire. I truly do. You deserve it. Sincerely, Barbara. As I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer, I smiled. Not because I needed her validation, not because I needed closure, but because it confirmed what I had always known. I had won, not by fighting, not by revenge, but by thriving. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all.